Nigel, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we're almost at the end of COP27, so it's fantastic that you can spare a bit of time to talk to us. I wanted to start with something you've talked a lot about, really compellingly, which is around exponential change. You've said if we get the right conditions in place, that the deployment of all these green technologies we need will be exponential. We can get to net zero faster than we expect. Just looking at the last couple of weeks, what are the signals of change that you've seen here in Sharm el-Sheikh that give you confidence about that, and you can see what's going to move next?
Well, I think there's the sort of the institutional arrangements changing, and then there's some of the actual facts on the ground. So the institutional arrangements changing, I would say, is we're having more and more ministers talking to CEOs, financiers, technical experts about this short-term pathway. So for example, I was on a round table looking at green hydrogen, and with a couple of African energy, petroleum and mining ministers, and one of them said to me, I've never felt involved in this process before. So just pause for a minute. We're talking about an energy transition and energy ministers who've not felt involved. That's because the process has been led by environment ministries, because it was originally conceived of as an environmental issue, but as we get into implementation, so we're seeing more and more of that kind of granularity, and that's been kind of encapsulated in the work that we've done with the business community around setting very clear 2030 breakthrough targets, and the way the UK presidency then created this breakthrough agenda of 50 countries and growing, aligning around making those technologies the lowest cost everywhere in the world by 2030. So we've got sort of institutional arrangements improving, more sort of clubs of the ambitious rather than consensus process, which often leads to the more lowest common denominator, and public and private sort of egging each other on in what we call the ambition loop. But then if you look at the actual numbers, you see things like we need to get to 170 million tons of green steel by 2030 to be on track. If you follow the S curve, there's less than 1 million tons in production now, so it feels like we're completely failing if you just think linearly. But then you look at the pipeline, 60 million tons of projects. Right, so we got to start looking a little bit more at some of the leading indicators to show the dynamism in the real economy, which is not captured in most of the reports, which just add up current policy or current plans.
And the flip side of that, I expect, is also when you look at the S curve, things like coal are going to go down. So we see pipeline, there's no more funding.
Right, and we see this, and we see this happens quite quickly. The IEA have now called peak fossil fuels this decade. But I was with the chief economist of the IEA the other day. We had an energy breakthrough event, and they've done a really interesting analysis of current manufacturing capacity for key technologies like solar, and the needed manufacturing capacity by 2030. And then very interestingly, they said, okay, but what's already been committed to be built this decade? And on solar, if you take current capacity plus already committed, we're already at 100% of what we need to be by 2030. It has to be built out, but we're in 2022, that will be built out way quicker. So we'll over-deliver on solar. Batteries, if you add those two up, we're already at 80%. Green hydrogen, already at 60%. But that's the exponential growth kicking in, that those pipelines are growing very, very fast. I think you start using those indicators, we can be much more confident that we'll get to net zero faster than 2050.
And that's what we need investors and policymakers to be looking at when they're thinking about where we are and how fast we're moving.
Yeah.
So it takes us on to another topic, which I think is close to your heart, which is around collaboration.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're the high-level champion for non-state actors here at COP. What's the balance in your mind between collaboration on the one hand and competition? And we've seen some pushback. The EU said the Inflation Reduction Act was anti-competitive. We've seen some pushback around antitrust on industry collaboration. How do we navigate those concerns? How do we unleash competition for climate action?
Well, the sectors with much faster technology turnover rates, like the tech sector, have mastered this, right? So you think about 4G, 5G, what that actually means is a pre-competitively agreed technology pathway to allow the whole sector to move faster. And that's a pretty competitive sector, right? But the antitrust issue and the sort of trade issue are two slightly different things.
Sure.
But on antitrust, basically we've got amazing pre-competitive collaboration in shipping, steel, aviation, cement. All of the European truck manufacturers agreed that they'd go 100% electric before 2040. So that's pretty strong. We occasionally, when you've got kind of basket case politics like in the States at the moment, you have antitrust fishing expeditions to suggest that there's some sort of antitrust practice here. There is a problem that antitrust law doesn't distinguish between colluding to gouge the public and colluding to save the world.
For a public good.
Yeah, for a public good. So, but there is some really interesting, and in fact there's a legal futures lab going on in about half an hour here, looking at some of those sort of issues. So I think we'll see clarification on that the law will be pushed on that. The trade issue is slightly different, right, because that's not antitrust competition concerns, that's going to government support, unfair levels of government support
and discriminatory.
Well, that's we could talk about the way that the EU and the US distort the market for agricultural goods and suppress demand from Africa. That's an ongoing trade issue. The really interesting thing is that the WTO under Ngozi are now looking at the green issues in global trade arrangements. But I think in a way more interesting than the sort of concern from Europe about what the States are doing is the realization that this is a competitive race, and that if America's going to speed up the transition, then Europe better speed up, otherwise Europe's going to lose out. And that I think we're seeing more and more, and I would say 2 of the 4 biggest economies in the world, California and Germany, have a net zero 2045 target. Yeah. So why would anyone who's got any aspirations to industrial competitiveness wallow in the laggard end at 2050? I think we'll see those dates all coming forward in the next few years.
And the subsidies where needed coming forward to help the competitive firms in those markets,
and the Americans would argue, I think accurately, that Germany really kick-started solar costs down through a government mandated program. The UK, I think, can argue that they've done the same on offshore wind, and the States would argue that by investing public dollars in early stage on the S-curve, they'll drive the cost down, which other countries will benefit from. So I think you can argue it both ways. You can argue that they're locking in.
What President Biden said when he was here last week. Maybe final question, just around, we supported you on the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, which is a fantastic initiative to define some kind of clear, practical outcomes that actors can align around on the adaptation side. But we still hear from businesses, hang on, where are the bankable project here? What's the business case to be doing this? What's your response to that? How do we motivate?
Well, my basic response is stop being lazy and roll your sleeves up and start doing some work. And this is the kind of work you've helped us with, of actually digging underneath the kind of headline issue of adaptation and resilience to specific solutions, and what the business case and what the financing structure might need to be to unlock flows there. And the reason I say people need to stop being lazy is there's a myth going around that there's no business case for investing in adaptation. At the same time, everyone knows that macroeconomically we have a much bigger economy if we invest in adaptation. So those two things cannot be held in one mind at the same time, right? With any degree of rigor. But the issue is that it's like, like for example, there's the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment and the Fast Infra label, which is some really important collaborative work in the investment industry, and it's something that I think you guys have been pointing to. Is we have to stop taking a zero base case. Yeah. Like, there is no world in which nothing happens. Yeah. The base case is things get a lot worse and there are economic losses. Yeah. So if you make that your base case, and then you compare that with the case of investing, then you have a very different comparison than assuming that the world just carries on as it is. So basically it's about digging deeper and investigating.
And you're exactly right. We've done some of that work with national and subnational governments to say, you think your GDP is growing at this rate, but actually if you take climate impacts into account, you're a baseline, and then it's an investment. It makes a difference. Okay, I'm going to ask one final question to you. A lot of what we have to do with our clients is change their minds. Yeah. We have to change their minds about the urgency of the problem, we have to change their minds about the costs, and we have to change their minds about the opportunities. You've been in this role now for 3 years, I think. What have you changed your mind about over the last few years?
Oh, the biggest learning for me is because I was working very much on mitigation in the global north. So what I've really learned a lot about is this whole resilience and adaptation agenda, and that there is a business case and we have to invest and we have to take it seriously. And also that that 1.5, as the badge says, is not a goal that we can just drift past to 1.6 or 1.7 and feel we've done okay. It's really a biophysical limit. If you listen to Johan Rockström saying, beyond that we get into very scary tipping point territory. Remember, even net zero by 2050 is only 50% chance. So it's terrible risk management. So and we will not do that if we don't get it right in the global south. And so we have to take much more seriously the kind of Marshall Plan mentality at a global level. That if we don't mobilise the 2.4 trillion a year, domestic, public, private, in the global south, then we will not stay within the 1.5 degree limit, and then we'll unleash all sorts of very, very scary forces. It's very easy to see the rise of fascism and big conflict if we don't stay within that limit. So for me, it would be taking adaptation resilience seriously and really focusing on mobilising finance in the global south.
Perfect. Nigel, thank you so much for joining us.
Great.
Enjoy the last couple of days of COP.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.